has felt to me like time's been a bit weird.
Yeah.
So how many people have you got in your team now? Because a little bit came across from SVB.
So we bought SVB UK, and then we hired a bunch of people here in the US. In total, there's I guess 100 people here in the US now in innovation banking.
Okay.
They don't all do climate tech. They do kind of all types of. They're kind of sector agnostic. So it's software, climate tech, and med tech.
Okay.
And then we have a small team in continental Europe. We have a team in Israel, and then a team in
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this latest Reuters Newsmaker event from Climate Week in New York. My name is Simon Jessop, editor Sustainable Finance at Reuters. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my guests, Celine Herweijer, HSBC Chief Sustainability Officer, and Martin Richards, Global Head of Sustainable Finance and Climate Tech at HSBC. Welcome.
Thanks, Simon. Great to be here.
Cool. So it's obviously Climate Week running alongside UNGA. We've just had a roll call of leaders step up to the stage and warn, particularly from the vulnerable countries, low island states, that we need to move as a planet quicker. The banking system is obviously a key part of that. So maybe as a scene setter, when you look across the system as a whole, is the banking system moving quicker? Happen to help it move a bit quicker?
Well, the roll call is timely because we are off track for 1.5. We do need to accelerate the rate of the transition that we're in at the moment. So absolutely needed. I think it's always important to remember that finance doesn't exist in a vacuum, the sector, and banks is part of that, right? So we respond to the needs of businesses and customers who are actually investing in the technologies and infrastructure in the real world, right? So we're here in a way to kind of facilitate and enable their transition. But absolutely, much more needs to be done. And I think a key focus when we've looked at UNGA this week, the special topic, the theme of this particular one has been around, in a way, kind of reforming the international process, the multilateral system, and there are different activities within there that are going to be important in terms of directing finance to the transition. Actually, the wording that was agreed in the pact earlier this week, the Pact for the Future, so-called Pact for the Future, on climate is pretty similar to what was agreed within the UAE declaration, as you know, at the last COP meeting. So UNGA week isn't normally the week where you get massive progress on climate. That tends to happen in the COP meetings. But nevertheless, the focus and the discussions this week really have been around how do we reform that public-private intersection so we can use public capital to unlock private capital at much more scale.
Thank you. Obviously, it's been a big year for elections. I guess the obvious question, we've got the US one coming up just around the corner, but how important is the policy picture to all of this? It feels like a pass the parcel sometimes, with everyone waiting for the next person to move first. Are we at the point where governments just need to step up a bit more on the policy? Would that unlock faster action? Yeah,
and again, I'll come a little bit back to the process, and then I'll come back to kind of where we are. So in terms of the political process, actually, next year is quite an important year. It's 10 years after the Paris Agreement, and in February next year, governments, just under 200 are supposed to submit their next plans, their so-called nationally determined contribution, their country-level plans. And what we need within those, the ones I think it's February, we need much more detail at the sector level in terms of ideally investment positive policies that they can put forward that can help again steer in. So we're waiting obviously for that to happen, but we've seen great movement in the meantime. I mean, one thing we can't lose track of though is the market is also moving because of technology innovation and adoption, right? So if you look at there's various different stats for that, right? But just look at clean power installed in the last year, about 90% of that was solar and wind. And that's because of the ubiquitous nature now of these technologies. Even EVs, the adoption curves for EVs, solar and wind are now so ubiquitous, it's almost like at the time of mobile phones kind of scaling up. So technology can happen, but there's some of the areas where it's harder for that transformation to happen. I'll just give you a couple of examples, and they're the ones where we really do need governments to step in the form of tax credits, subsidies, mandates around phase-outs and things like that. And it's very much so in the kind of industrial decarbonisation space, things like scaling sustainable aviation fuels, clean hydrogen coming out. So some of those kind of more nascent technologies, which we can come back to, they're the ones definitely where we need much more kind of crunchy government support to help unlock them, because they're just not price competitive.
But just to square off the politics point, has it become more complicated this year? I mean, I can't remember what the stat was. Was it 2/3 of the planet went to the polls? Has that shaken the calculus? Or are you confident that enough bits are in place moving forward to help?
Yeah, I mean, policy enables everything, right? And I guess the point I was trying to make is we're at such a place now in terms of renewable penetration and kind of EV sales. We're on target to have 50% of sales by 2030 being, EV. So in some areas, technology is starting to take over, but they've had policy support in the past. Right, to bring down the cost curves and the economies of scale in producing them. Obviously, we still need that to continue, especially with EVs. but there are other areas where it really, really does matter. And again, we can't transition away from fossil fuels. We can't bring that demand down until you decarbonize those harder areas of transport and industry as well. So it does matter. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe we could jump to Martin just on that point. Nice segue on the hard-to-abate sectors. It's felt like for years everyone was happy to pay to build windmills or solar or drop some money on software that didn't cost them that much up front. The really hard stuff, the capex heavy stuff, was the last cab off the rank. Has that changed this year? What gives you hope on the hard-to-abate sectors?
I would say not necessarily changed this year, but it's been changing over time. When we started our venture debt program, we did EVs, chargers, batteries. Now as we move into kind of later years, we're really getting into those industrial processes. We acquired SVB UK about a year ago, and then hired a team of, we're now over 100 people here in the US, people in Europe, Israel, and Hong Kong. And with that early stage team, we're able to serve clients all the way from seed through IPO, and are being able to do things like long duration storage, thermal storage, green hydrogen, geological hydrogen, which is naturally occurring hydrogen, and we even bank a nuclear fusion company. So we certainly are getting into the kind of harder to abate and tougher than understand technologies.
Thank you. Could you maybe just talk a little bit more about the SVB type? How has that impacted what you as a global bank can do? Are there any stories just about how it's attracting business?
Yes, so we have a great global franchise and have that for years and can help companies go anywhere in the world. But with the SVB purchase and hiring, we've been able to help companies from a much earlier stage. So right from seed funding, we can help those companies bank them, provide them capital, and take them around the world. We see the real value being kind of the 3 C's. Capital, connections, and clients. And that's really what climate tech companies are looking for. They're needing the capital to grow. They want connections around the world, and it might be a company in Dubai that needs their technology. But then they also need clients, and they need people to buy what they're selling. And so we think we can offer all 3 of those things. And putting together, I would say, the best of SVB and the best of HSBC is how we feel like we have a real competitive advantage, and at this point are the preeminent climate tech bank.
Obviously, very heavily US-focused SVB. The clue's in the name, I guess. But how is the growth trajectory looking for ex-US clients?
So climate tech wasn't all invented in Silicon Valley. We're seeing it all around the world. In fact, when you look at the deals that we've done, we have a hub in Hong Kong, Israel, Europe, UK, and the US, and we have deals in every one of those hubs. There is a significant amount of invention here in the US, so we follow that invention and follow the VCs. But we're actually seeing a lot of deployment around the world. It's great to decarbonize the US, but if we don't address the needs of the global South, we're not going to actually win.
A little bit about IP transfer. It's been a running theme at COPs in recent years. Has there been any movement on that? Is it still, how much of a sticking point is it, do you think, and what could unlock?
I mean, we're seeing climate tech companies want to go global. As far as they don't seem to be concerned about IP transfer getting away from them. They really actually want to go to the places where they're needed. I think most people in the climate space, and I feel like we are the same, want to do good as well as be commercially successful. And we're seeing that with people going to Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just we'll build it in we'll invent it in the US and we'll build it in the US and we'll never leave our shores, because people understand that's not the way to actually win this.
And could we talk a bit about the market? It's been a bit of a up and down market this year. Where are we now? What's your view on the next, say, 6-12 months?
So it's been a tough equity market, and that's not exclusive to climate tech. All venture funding has been down. 21 was probably the peak of valuations, and since then we've had down rounds and lower valuations. And again, it's not exclusive to climate tech, but they've been covered on that trend, and they've been those things have happened to the climate tech companies too. I think because of that, we see debt being not necessarily a substitute for equity, but being kind of a good partner. If you need to raise money, you want to raise it effectively. You want to make sure that you have the right kind of capital for the right kind of need. And we think both debt and equity together is a really nice match. When I look forward, we're going to have ups and downs. The road to net zero is not going to be a straight line. But we see climate tech as being a secular trend. And therefore, year after year, there's going to be more and more interest, more and more capital, and more companies. So we're very bullish about the space.
So just to build on that a little bit, so the kind of climate tech, let's say, heyday that we had between 2018, 2021, 22, obviously, layering on top of that, we had high energy prices, right? So that helps some things in terms of heat pumps, EVs, things like that. We also had, obviously, the low interest rate. So for a climate tech company, if you need a lot of capex to invest in, your deep tech company, new infrastructure, that's obviously a good thing. And those that needed, consumer debt essentially to purchase. So if you're installing solar on your rooftop, etc. Again, it was a nice environment for them. So there was a headwinds. Plus, in that kind of time, just post-pandemic, we also had a lot of government action starting to come in, where we started off with the conversations in terms of new tax credits, new incentives. So we started to see climate tech there being the fastest vertical in a way, alongside AI in the venture capital ecosystem. It is normalizing now, but as Martin does say, it's normalizing against a backdrop now of this secular trend that is not going away. There's still growth happening. It's just a bit more normalized from a valuations perspective.
Thank you. Could you maybe talk a bit more about the incumbents? So I've seen various VC press releases across my desk, XYZ, big company, getting in a Series A or B or whatever. Yeah. Is that happening more? Obviously, they've got a vested interest in accelerating this tech through and solving their problems. Are they really committed to that, or are they standing in the way of business operational change?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually another one of the kind of famous things about the climate tech early stage investment ecosystem, which is quite unique between other ecosystems. You probably see it actually in AI as well. You see a lot more corporate venture capital than in other investment thematics here, and that is because these big established companies, have their own net zero ambitions and pledges, and they know they need to get there. And to get there, a lot of new technology is going to be needed. So they are looking to invest early stage in the ecosystem, in addition to kind of direct R&D that they're doing on their side, and it's critically important. And actually, it's not just the fact that it's the strategic partnerships then that come. That's, in a way, it's the demand curve for these new players. When they've got an almost advanced purchasing commitment, they can work in partnership with those that are going to be building these and adopting these technologies.
Yeah, maybe I could add to that. So we work with a lot of CVCs, corporate venture capital firms, and they might be oil companies, maybe other companies. But we see them as really additive to the capital stack. Not only are they bringing money, but they're also oftentimes bringing offtake for that technology. And so you're seeing, for instance, in the green hydrogen, electric hydrogen, BP Ventures is one of the investors in that name. And so not only are you seeing capital, you're seeing expertise, you're seeing the understanding of the space, but you're also seeing potentially the offtake of their first production. So I think it's an additive to the outcome accelerant.
Great, thank you. Jumping to nuclear, we saw some banks come out and lend a bit more support to it the last couple of days. The governments want to roll it out, but clearly it's been a bit of a poison chalice for a lot of institutions over the years. What's your position on it? Is it changing?
I mean, we've got a big appetite for nuclear. You can't get to net zero, you can't do the energy transition without nuclear, right? The more you move up the penetration of renewables into any grid, you need that stable base load, and ideally you want to wean yourself off gas and peaker plants for that stable base load over time. So it's absolutely going to be critical. We already do a lot, whether it's large scale or whether it's investing in through the venture debt climate and some of the kind of earlier even fusion type advances that are happening there. It's definitely an area for us. So hugely supportive of both the government ambition and the increasing financial sector ambition to help scale these technologies.
Is government speaking to you? Are many new governments speaking to you about it? And I'm just curious what sort of timelines we're talking about. Is this a late
I mean, I can't go into details of confidential deals, but we're in the process of having discussions on a number of different things, from large scale to smaller scale, and a lot of the interesting ones also are going to be some of the smaller modular reactors, right, that help bring down the cost of production, the timelines of getting them up and going. And ideally, there's a lot of innovation that needs to happen, again, to get the economies of scale of specific technologies there. So it's very exciting. Corporate clients as well are investing. You probably saw the Microsoft announcement this week.
Yes.
I mean, there's been car manufacturers who've done stuff on small modular reactors. But, I mean, the Microsoft story is I mean, just more broadly, I think the story of big tech and the future of big tech being part of the power ecosystem is a really interesting one that's been hotly debated this week. Or not debated, discussed.
Yeah. How do you expect that to change the sector's debate on that topic, about nuclear fusion, about power supply, about tech?
I mean, I do bring it up a level from nuclear. Nuclear is one of the tools we have to get there, right? But what this means is, I think the big tech companies already had growing kind of power or growing load growth, essentially, because of increasing data centers and cloud usage, right, as all of us corporations go onto the cloud, right? At the same time, you layer in what's happened with AI, and there was a big uptick after ChatGPT, especially 22, 23, and we've just seen now the projections, I think the upper end of those projections. So we're going to need 10% of US electricity generation coming from data centers by 2030. That's the upper end, right? So the challenge to begin with was, how do we transition away from fossil fuels, bring the new clean power to replace existing fossil fuels? You add on top of that the transition challenge of, we need to also electrify everything, right? So we need to electrify transport, we need to electrify industrial systems, we need to electrify homes. So that creates even more demand that we need, electricity demand, etc. And now we've got the third layer now that's emerged, which is this data center AI demand, of which obviously that sits squarely in the realms of big tech companies who are behind it. So what's happening for them, this kind of paradigm shift right now, is that big tech companies, that the value opportunity of AI and cloud for them is far greater than the cost of electricity, right? They've made commitments that their clouds are going to be, the kind of neutral net zero type, net zero operations and cloud infrastructure by 2030. So that basically creates a whole new, in a way, kind of demand signal now for clean power coming from those entities. And to get there, they know they're going to have to invest directly, right? So they're almost now becoming part of the, not just energy companies potentially, but power companies of the future. And with that, they can also bring, they can buy at a higher cost, right? They can get involved in some of these more nascent technologies like long duration energy storage, like, nuclear, to be able to, to meet these specific needs that they have going forward as well. So that actually brings a benefit, because a lot of these harder projects were hard to finance, and now with the capital that those companies and their ability to have these advanced purchase commitments, it definitely does help alongside it being a challenge.
Thank you. Martin, you touched on a couple of interesting technologies earlier. For both of you, which are the ones that excite you the most, the funkiest ones, the left field ones that could really move the needle on the climate crisis, and which areas are giving you most cause for concern, just because maybe we're moving a bit too slowly?
So I'm very excited about long duration storage. I mean, I think as Celine identified, we're going to have more and more demand on the grid. We're going to have more and more renewables on the grid, and you don't actually have to worry about anything but peak on the grid. And you build a grid for the 1 second that is the peak demand. With long duration storage, you can put more and more renewables on the grid. When the sun isn't shining, you have long duration storage. You still have power, and so you significantly reduce the size the grid has to be if you have the right kind of storage. So I'm very excited about that. I also really like, it's very early days, but there is something called geological hydrogen, which is hydrogen below the ground, naturally occurring hydrogen. When water drips on certain kinds of rock, hydrogen is produced. If you have a porous rock layer and then a hard shell or crust of rock above that, you can actually have a buildup of hydrogen. And using AI technology, et cetera, I mean, we have some clients that are, I would say going wildcatting for hydrogen, as you would for oil and gas. And if that is successful, you could build up a whole infrastructure of industrial needs and uses around that hydrogen source. And as we started off this session, you know, the easier to decarbonize, like EVs, solar, wind, that's in flight. It's the harder to decarbonize industrial processes that we really need to crack right now.
Just on that point, are there any that you look at and go, that's probably the one that's getting the least amount of attention, or really does need a bit more attention?
I mean, I feel like there's, you know, for a long time there was a lot of money going into EVs, and that was, you know, maybe we weren't getting enough money in things that were harder. But I do feel like there's money now going into all sectors. I mean, we're seeing deals in everything from, you know, SAF to hydrogen, fusion, you name it. So I don't really think there's a one sector that's really undercapitalized. Although we are getting to the point, I think, where people are beginning to choose winners, and you know, it's a winnowing of the field, which is probably the appropriate place to be.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's always a darling, right? Every year there's a darling. I think in 2022 the darling was carbon removal technology. I think right now people are starting to look. Everyone's talking about geological hydrogen, right? That's such a kind of silver bullet type solution for getting the scale. We don't have enough electrolytic hydrogen to satisfy the needs. So if we can do this geologic hydrogen, then that's amazing. Obviously fusion, right? If we ever get there, like that's, again, it's one of those kind of silver bullet nirvana type technologies that are important to go after. But for me, like, again, we just spoke about it, one of the biggest challenges is going to be this grid, right? With this amount of load growth happening, you know, I didn't even mention population growth and emerging economies and increasing energy demand there. But for me, all of the technologies that are going to be needed, and a lot of it will be AI infused, to help a grid function and the grid infrastructure to function effectively and optimize. And you know, there's a whole load of kind of chip innovation that's going to be needed, and algorithm innovation and all sorts of things. So I think that kind of everything that, you know, helps with the interconnection issue and doing the low growth is one of the fundamentals, because you then need that clean power grid to power everything else, right? So that probably, for me, I think for us as a bank, like, we want to be the bank for climate tech, right? We've been supporting entrepreneurs since we started, and we believe this is, like, not just an amazing commercial opportunity, but critical. And I think one of the areas that, just to kind of clarify, like, we've also made these portfolio, you know, Adam, the portfolio financed emissions commitment for all of this, you know, for the sectors those heavy industry sectors, those transport sectors, etc. And our clients in those sectors that are the larger aviation companies, the larger cement makers, you know, the conglomerates, the industrial conglomerates, they're not going to be able to get the level of decarbonisation that's in their plans at the moment unless these technologies scale, right? So we have a dual interest, both in terms of helping the kind of larger part of our portfolio, those established players, decarbonise at the pace they need to and successfully transition and thrive as they do so, as well as helping, you know, the commercial opportunities of helping these kind of small players as well.
Great. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Celine, Martin, lovely to see you both. Thanks again.
Thanks, Sam.